Hi, my name is Gray Lovelace. This is Technically Speaking with Source Allies, and today we are going to be covering kind of a different topic than what I've gone over in the past. We're not going to be coding something specifically, but instead we're going to talk about a pipeline that I've set up that integrates a few different services all together and incorporates ChatGPT and AI to be able to put them all together without a human being having to touch any of them. There will be some code in there, mostly to just interact with some of the AI pieces and chunk things out so we don't get rate limited, but I'm excited, so let's dive in. What you see right here is my GitHub repository called AI Audio Notes. This is under my name, Gray-Lovelace, so this is available for anyone who wants to come look at it. This is based off of a tutorial that I found and integrates a few different services. So let's go over those services right now. The first one I'm going to use is some kind of file storage system. In this case, it's going to be Google Drive. Cloud storage system specifically works best. The part in front of this that I haven't really covered in this is I also have a phone recording app that is hooked directly up to my Google Drive in a particular folder called Easy Voice Recorder. This is not an ad for that app, but it does work with Google Drive. So you can see right here that I have a folder inside my drive called Easy Voice Recorder that it automatically created for me. This is what we're going to be monitoring for different voice recordings that come through. Next, we have the OpenAI transcription API. There are a few different transcription APIs available. I know Amazon has one as well. OpenAPI has one. The OpenAPI one is fairly cheap and it is fairly accurate. So that is the one we use in this particular case, especially because we're then going to integrate with the OpenAI Chat API, which is the one that people are probably most familiar with nowadays, which is as if you were talking to the chat interface on the UI for ChatGPT. Afterward, we are going to integrate with a kind of note-taking /to-do /personal wiki site called Notion that you can either use as an entire team of people or you can use it personally. I use it personally to organize my life. I love it. It's awesome. Let me know if you want to know about Notion more later. But what we would expect to happen is I'm going to record something on my phone, or I can take any kind of recording that I want and drop it into a particular folder on my Google Drive. We would expect to see that it is then going to be transcribed for me, which I have set up to use English. I do believe that there are options you can use for other languages as well. And then after that transcription happens, we are going to send that transcription along with a couple of prompts to our OpenAI chat. And we're going to tell the chat that we want it to respond specifically in a way that we can parse out using JSON in this particular case, and we can kind of massage that data a little bit and then use that JSON data to then interact with our Notion API to create a new item in one of my Notion databases that I use as a note database. So let's go look at the end of this so we can actually visualize what's going to happen before we start digging into how did we even accomplish this. So skipping all the way ahead to the end, we have our AI notes database. What we should see in here is a lot of different recordings. You can see some metadata about those recordings, like a title. This title is not something I put in. These are all named like My Recording 1 and My Recording 2 in Google Drive. Here they have an actual title. You'll see some weird ones here. I'll go into them in a second. They're mostly just me making sure that this pipeline worked after I created it. You'll also see when it was done. You'll see the duration of the clip. So you can see we have things ranging up to a little bit over 10 minutes here, or ones down in like the 20-second range, just maybe like a quick little memo or a quick story I want to get out of my head right away. And then an estimated cost for how much this cost me. We can go into costs kind of at the end. You can set some limits on a lot of these things. Like I know OpenAI, once you create an account and generate a personal access token, you can tell it, I only want to spend tops $10 a month, cut me off after that. That's what I have it set up to. I think I've maybe spent about 50 cents to $1 so far, which I think we can afford. So let's take a look at what gets dumped out of here. So here is a really good example. I presented this at an AWS user group just a couple of weeks ago here, and this was the presentation that one of my coworkers, Eric, gave before me about kind of preparing a data strategy as an organization as you're going to start leveraging generative AI. So right before I went up and gave this demo that I'm about to give you now, I just recorded him for about looks like 9.5 minutes talking about how you would get those things set up. And you can see as we come down here, it generated a summary for us. Eric from Source Ally It's Source Allies, but that's okay. Talks about the need for executive alignment, security and compliance, culture of curiosity, and a clear North Star. Those were the exact slides he had up while he was giving this presentation. It actually does an excellent job of summarizing for you. But let's start focusing on some of the things that you wouldn't be able to necessarily get as a human being just listening to this right away, or if you're just trying to do a brain dump into a voice recording, things that it can give you that are additional benefit beyond just, what did I just say? Right, so we have title and summary, which kind of fit into that area. We have the transcription later on down the line here that I'll show you. Quite a long transcription, but here are things that we are going to tell OpenAI to generate for us. So things like our main points in a bulleted list. Gray will do a live demo building an AI application pipeline right after Eric's talk. That is exactly what happened. Some potential action items. I think this is great, especially if you start using this in like a meeting context. Create a data strategy with executive alignment, security and compliance, a culture of curiosity, and a clear North Star. Perfect. Encourage that culture of curiosity, modernize and transform legacy systems to enable generative AI. Those are actually really good action items that were pulled out of it. This is kind of a dry example, but honestly, this is something that it's someone rambling for a long time using a lot of technical jargon, and it handled it all really, really well. Some stories, examples, and citations are great. I love the follow-up questions. They can often dig into things that if you're preparing for a presentation, people will then be like, oh, this is something someone could feasibly ask that I need to be prepared for afterward. And then here's one of my favorites, which is the arguments and ideas for improvement. And this tells us things like, hey, maybe this isn't such a good idea, or it's a particular thing that someone could come up and say like, hey, I don't think this is great. Creating a culture of curiosity and experimentation may be difficult in some organizations, especially those that are risk averse. That's extremely true. I've worked in very risk averse areas like insurance and the financial industry, and that is something that you need to keep in mind when you're bringing ideas like this to the table. I've spent a lot of time on this one. Let's go look at a much, much shorter one, because this can also be used personally and can be used for fun. I had a coworker of mine tell me a story off the cuff, and that was The Princess and the Spaghetti. That classic story everybody knows, Princess and Spaghetti. There's a princess trapped in a castle. She needs someone else to go get her spaghetti for her because she is trapped in the castle. It's pretty standard stuff. My favorite is a lot of the arguments and areas for improvement in this story. Things like story's too short to be analyzed. It is lacking in detail and context. It is not well written. I'm sorry, Shaylin. Story was not well written. OpenAI says so. So this is what we're expecting to get out the other end. How did we accomplish this? Let's go look at that part, the technical part of technically speaking. So we went over all of the different services we're going to integrate together. First steps first is you're going to go through, you're going to need to make sure you have accounts on all of these. Let's assume that you've done that part already. Next thing that we're going to do is we are going to use a pipe dream pipeline. And if someone hasn't had experience with pipe dream before, which I hadn't before I put this together, it is very similar to other services like Zapier or If This Then That. It just takes a bunch of pre-integrated services and it will kind of plug them all together for you based on different triggers. And the thing I like about PipeDream a lot is it allows you to inject different code snippets in there that interact with the payloads that came out of different steps and triggers you had before. So in this particular case, we're going to be using Node.js for almost everything. They also have a Python SDK that you can use, and they have some other options as well. But those are going to be what most people follow into for these kind of simple scripts that we're going to be looking at right now. Everything you see in this particular repo is, like I said, all going to be Node.js, named the same as the step that we will be going over. So I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. So let's go look at the PipeDream UI. So once you've created an account and done everything, you can see that you have a workflows area here, and there's going to be a list of a bunch of different workflows you set up. I just have the one right now, and you can see it has a bunch of different steps here. And let's dig into AI Notes, and we're just going to go ahead and hit Edit. This will show us all the code that's going through, and it'll also give us examples of payloads that have been sent through this, because you do need to send in kind of some Sentry payloads through so it can get an idea of what it can provide to you the next steps later on. First things first is going to be a Google Drive action that is just a trigger. This requires no custom code. You can just point it to Google Drive, you can authenticate, and then you can select the different folders that you want. So if you look in the configure step, you can see my Drive account, you can see the folders that we want, AI Notes and Easy Voice Recorder are the two I can drop stuff into. and it will automatically trigger off this process for us. And what I love here is you can see exactly the payload that comes out of it that is available to you as a JSON object in all of your node steps that follow this. So if I want to get the file that was uploaded, I can go steps.trigger.event, and I have this name right here of the file. Next, after we have that trigger, we actually need to download that. Otherwise, we won't actually be able to get to the content of the file without authenticating every single time. So we're going to download that to a temp directory. And this is very, very simple. You just follow up and you say, hey, there was this trigger event ID right here. And then right after the trigger event ID, we're just going to give it a destination file path and name. So every single time this happens, we're just going to download that file into /temp/recording.mp4, mp3, I think are the two different things that I've set it up to work with right now. I'm just grabbing the file extension. So every time you see /temp/recording/summit file extension from now on, that is going to be the file that I uploaded that triggered this whole process to begin with. And you can see some results there that we don't really end up using. Next, we're going to do some very, very simple node code called getDuration, and this is going to, you'll see in all of these code snippets, we're going to kind of have a wrapper right here. That is all stuff that we need for this to work inside Pipedream. All of the actual logic inside this async run function, that is the stuff we are writing in this particular case. So for this one, leveraging a very simple music metadata package, grabbing the parse file out of it, and you can see that we're calling await parse file to get some data about the file, and then we are going and grabbing the duration specifically, and then returning a rounded version of that duration. You can see the results pop out, and we just have the seconds that get returned to us. So I can reference this later with steps.getDuration.returnValue, and that should pop out 446 in this particular case. Next up, we are going to integrate with some of our OpenAI services. So to create transcription here, this one is actually one that is built into Pipedream, and I would imagine it's been around for a while, so most things have either this or AWS that you can just integrate directly with, and you don't need to do a lot of custom code. So this one, I authenticate with OpenAPI using my personal access token that I've generated on OpenAPI. I create, or I point to my file path that I have that we talked about earlier, and then I just say that I want this to be a JSON response format, and this will do everything else for me. Don't really need to configure anything else. Like I said, there are some optional things for languages and stuff like that. What we want to see is in the results down here, we have a transcription inside our return value, and there's a lot of stuff there. That's how we're going to reference our transcription going on. Everything so far has been fairly straightforward, either very simple code or out-of-the-box stuff. The next one is going to require a little bit more configuration. So this is us interacting with the OpenAPI chat. So I'm gonna give you a confession right now. The confession is I'm not really someone that likes to use AI in my day-to-day workflow. I'm a little bit of an AI curmudgeon, some people would say. So the purpose of this exercise for me was, one, to have something to present at that user group, but two, it was to make something that I would use in my daily workflow I thought would provide value, and also figure out how I can do this through an integrated tool chain of applications that already exist. This is that part. So really, the thing I got out of this is how do you get like an AI curmudgeon like me or an old backend developer to integrate with AI? You just disguise it as kind of an unreliable REST API. And that's what we're going to do. Let's look at our configuration. We just authenticate with OpenAI using our personal access token like we talked about before. And then let's look at our code. Everything you're going to see in code here is going to be one of like 2 or 3 things. One, it's going to be some kind of configuration, mostly in this step, that is going to be things like our prompts that we want to send in. So that's really the most important part, and that's the only part that you will probably want to change on your side if you were to implement this for yourself. The second part is the majority of this code is going to be just for chunking up calls to REST APIs. And those REST APIs usually have a hard limit of how much data you can send per call. The chat API here is one example of that. And then when we send stuff into the Notion API later, we have a different unit of measurement we need to make sure that we stay under for each call. So we're just going to tokenize everything. We are going to break it into chunks, and then we're going to call the API once for every chunk, get back that data, and then kind of assimilate it all at the end again. That's basically all of the code here. So if you're only wanting to do like very, very small payloads as you go through this, there's a possibility you don't even need to do code, and you can actually just do a lot of this out of the box without having to have any of this JavaScript portion or this Python portion. Let's assume that you want to be able to handle 10-minute recordings as you go through this. So here you see that we have that token soft cap I was talking about of 2,000 tokens. What's a token, you ask? No one really knows, but they can show you how many tokens your payload is going to be, and then you can chunk it up if you want. And then here's that configuration. This is the part that is actually kind of fun. We have a system prompt that we're going to send in, and then we also have a user prompt we're going to send in. The system prompt is how we're going to try and tell OpenAPI to behave as if we are calling a REST API. We are calling a REST API, but it's going to behave as if the data we're getting back at the end is also a REST API, another nested JSON inside of our JSON response. So we're going to tell it exactly that. You're an assistant, you only speak in JSON, you do not write normal text. Here's an example format of something that you might send back to me. After you do that and you set the stage, we are going to make our user prompt. And our user prompt is going to say, this is the content I want you to provide, and here is the transcription or the transcription chunk that I want you to analyze and provide that back for. So this will take in a transcription chunk after we've chunked it out later on in here and send in exactly this string with a title, summary, main points, action items, all that really good stuff that we saw earlier. You can add as much as you want to this. Thought about asking it to create possibly like a mermaid diagram, if you guys have used those before, to document like a process I'm describing. That might be like a test I try and do later on after this. And then we send in our transcript chunk finally. So all of this is that configuration I talked about, and then all this code you see down here is just that chunking up logic I talked about. You can analyze this more on GitHub. This is the file that is literally just named the same as the step, which is OpenAI chat. Come in here, and OpenAI chat, exact same code. So going through here, like I said, you do all this, and then you see at the end here, we actually call OpenAI, and we give it some retry errors, some retry configurations. And then at the end, we compile it all together and we get out something like this. A return value with some data, with some choices, and inside choices, there is a message with content, and this is that content. So this is the, hopefully, a JSON response that came back that then you can parse and you don't have to do any other kind of formatting to it. We'll get to formatting that in just a second, but title, summary, and then we have some action items and a JSON array, some follow-up questions. Perfect. Exactly what we were looking for. Next, let's go look at formatting some of this stuff. So after we have gotten all of the responses back, we need to write a little bit of code to, one, make sure that it actually sent back JSON. The problem with some of the AI stuff is you can describe, or you can disguise it as a JSON response if you want, and you can tell it to only do that, but that doesn't necessarily mean it will only do that. In this case, we were just doing a couple of quick little regexes and some replacements to make sure that if it did send us stuff with like some trailing commas or sent us some things that didn't really make sense, we're going to try and address that. If it's so completely mangled that this doesn't help, I don't know that we're going to be able to get a lot of information out of it anyway, but this is going to help at least for most of the time if it sent back something it wasn't supposed to, which doesn't always happen. Usually it's pretty good for us. So after we parse that, we get some of our token information, and then you can see down here, we are just returning this in one big return object that is going to combine a lot of our responses that we had earlier if we had to chunk up our transcript. After we've done that, we come down here, and this is just going to be a little bit of formatting code to turn our longer fields, like our summary and our actual transcription, into paragraphs for us. So you'll see this is splitting up things based on a number of characters and splitting it up into a number of sentences per paragraph, and it will just kind of reformat that into an array of text, with each paragraph being its own string instead of one big dump of text that's going to be hard to kind of parse through once it's in our Notion page. After we do that, and you can see that we end up returning these entries here, those paragraphs, we are going to interact with the Notion API. So the configuration here is just interacting with your Notion account. That is also a personal access token, I believe, or you just log in here and it makes it available to you. And then inside of our code, you can see that we are grabbing the Notion HQ client object, and that's what we're going to run all of our different API calls through. So we do some very, very light formatting of data or massaging of data at the top and put it into this info object so it's easy to access instead of having to pull it from all of the different steps as we go through and make our payload for the API call. And then you can see that we have one payload that we use to actually create our page. So this is a title, it's a type, it's our AI cost, it's our duration, all that stuff that you saw in Notion as kind of our top level database pieces of information. And then we have a couple of small children that we have set up that are going to be the content of our page. That's just going to be the initial call to create the page. We don't want it to be too big. And now here is that chunking logic I was talking about again. So we are going to go through, create our header and items for all of those multiple things we talked about: summary, main points, follow-up questions, arguments, and areas for improvement. They follow similar patterns, so we're just going to take them, create an entire page, and then we're going to chunk that up into what are called blocks. For OpenAI, it was called tokens. For Notion, it's called blocks. And we are going to only send in like 80 blocks at a time because I think the limit is 100, and we need a little bit of wiggle room there. So you can see for the children chunk there, we do a reduce, and then we go and we call in to the Notion client and append on our children blocks to our payload. Now, that was a lot, but like I said, everything falls into either that kind of configuration we're using to talk and generate our content, or chunking things out, or there was a little bit of formatting logic in there to make sure our paragraphs look nice when they get uploaded. But everything else is extremely straightforward. If you want to look into this more later, like I said, this GitHub repo is available for anyone to come look at. Feel free. There is that link to the original tutorial that was done by Thomas J. Frank. He did a great job. I rewrote a lot of the logic there. If I'm going to use someone's bad code, it's going to be my own bad code. Thomas, you did a great job. That's just a joke. And then you are going to just take all of the code in here for each specific step, and it's named the same as the step that we just went over. So here's the Notion one we were just going over, and you are going to copy and paste that directly in to your code block, and you're good to go. It should be totally fine. And you drop in one recording, and you should see in about 30 seconds to maybe 2 minutes, depending on how you hit some of the triggers, it pop up in this notes database for you immediately. This has been Gray Lovelace speaking technically with Source Allies. Do you have a topic you want to see covered? Comment it down below. And if you want to know more about Source Allies, check out our website in either the description or in our profile. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.